Alright, today I am embarking on a project on my 2018 Tesla Model 3 rear drive to not only rotate the tires, which is just a normal part of maintenance for any car, especially mine since the tires are getting low on the back, but I'm also going to look at adding a switch that will disable the stability and traction control on the vehicle. I'll talk about more how to do that later, but for now, I've got the car parked on these 2x4s to raise the ride height so I can get my jack under there with a hunk of wood to protect the jacking point. And now I've got enough height to raise it up a little bit. Here we go.
Make sure you put down wheel chocks on the sides of the car that aren't being jacked up so it doesn't roll away on you.
21 millimeter socket.
I actually forgot to do that, so shame on me, but luckily the car didn't roll away on me.
Alright, I've got the left side tires and wheels on like I talked about. As you can see, the rear tires are pretty shot. They're pretty bald. I'm not surprised the way I drive this car. I drive it pretty hard and they just get worn out pretty quick on Teslas. Too much power, that's a good thing, right? The fronts are in a lot better shape, as you can see. So I'm going to put the fronts on the back to test out my stability control disablement and wear those down before I junk them. I just don't want to get in a situation where I'm seeing cords or they blow out or something because these treads are so low. I'm also going to, meanwhile, put on the new to me but still used and much better condition all seasons on the front. Those will stay on for probably the entire time I own this car. And then on the backs, I'll put on the new to me all seasons after I do the donuts on these ones that I'm either going to junk or sell or something. I'll sell them probably just as wheels and tell people that the tires are worn out because they are, especially on the rear. The fronts aren't so bad, but the rears were bad. So anyway, let's get started on the stability control disable part of the video. So as you can see, there's a wheel speed sensor right here that tells the computer what speed each wheel is turning. This is on the right rear. On the frame, there is also a connector for the same wire. You can trace this wire all the way from the wheel speed sensor up into the frame. In order to disable the stability control and traction control, I'm going to disconnect this plug, and you can see there's a little trigger that you can push that disconnects the release, I guess you would call it, on this connector. So as I'm holding down the trigger, holding the trigger to the left, kind of towards the camera and to the left, I'm going to use another screwdriver over here to slide off the connector. You should know that the connector that we're looking at is the female side, and the female side is connected to the chassis, connected to the frame with this little I guess push pin you'd call it. The back side is what slides off, so you have to push it away from the camera, slide it off in order to disconnect this. Don't try to pull this towards the camera. It's not going to work. It's connected to the frame unless you disconnect it from the frame. Instead, I'm going to trip the trigger here and then push back on the sensor back here so it slides off, the sensor connector. So it slides off the back towards the middle of the car. Alright, that was easy. By the white portion of the connector being visible, it's disconnected. See this here? This is on the back side. I call it the female end just because of the outer black plastic that goes around. So now there's no signal going to the computer, and the car doesn't know what the wheel speed sensor is and knows that this wheel speed sensor is not sending a signal, so it will disable the stability and traction control, allowing you to do pretty much whatever you want. I will stress, this is dangerous. Do not do this if you don't know what you're doing. I would recommend only doing this on a closed course, parking lot. Do not drive on the street with this, especially in the rain, the snow. Don't even think about it. It is really intense with the torque these motors put out. This car has a ton of power. Mine's rear-wheel drive, so there's no front wheels helping keep it stable. Please, please do not do this unless you know what you're doing. It's extremely dangerous to drive a car in this way, so please be careful.
Just to really highlight the dangers of driving with no stability or traction control in any car, and I would say especially a Tesla, here's some footage from a few days ago. I was driving to literally buy these all-season tires for my Tesla, knowing that my rear tires were bald. On the way, I noticed that the rear tires were hydroplaning here and there, so I slowed down a little bit. And not long after, the rain intensified and the car started sliding around even more. You can see here this footage. The rear tires were hydroplaning, they were so bad. And this is after the front tires have removed a lot of the water from the road that the rear tires would have otherwise had to drive through. I'd love to tell you I saved this car from spinning out all by myself, but the computers took over and braked the correct wheel at the correct time to stop the car from spinning around. Believe me, I was sawing back and forth on the wheel, desperately trying to stop this car from spinning out. But honestly, I think the computer and the sensors and stability control from Tesla are what saved this car from spinning out completely. So my point is this. Do not disable your stability or traction control unless you know what you're doing and you are prepared to suffer the consequences of crashing and perhaps injury. Seriously, don't mess around with this stuff, and if you do, be extremely careful.
Now I'm going to take it for a spin after I put the wheels on, of course, and I'll show you the results of Tesla Model 3 rear-wheel drive with no stability or traction control. If I was going to leave it off longer, I'd probably tape it up and maybe even secure it somewhere, but I'm not going far. I won't be doing this for long. All right, you'll know you'll have done things correctly when the steering wheel feels really stiff. There's no power steering when you've disconnected the stability and traction control for some reason. You can also see some other error messages coming up. Ignore the TPMS, that's just because I recently put on the new wheels. That's not related to the stability traction control mod, but there are other things. You can see traction control disabled. You can see the steering effort message. Ignore this one as well. That's because the old tires had no tread on them. That's always been there. Here's one, ABS disabled. That's part of the stability of traction control. And the steering effort again. So this is how you know you've done it right and that you're in for some fun, but also some danger. Again, be careful. This is not something you should do casually.
Despite my warnings about safety, here I set off looking to do some donuts and drifts. And along the way, you can see by all of the rubber I'm leaving on the ground that I couldn't resist the temptation to leave two stripes at every opportunity. The power of this car, the torque is just immense, and it's just way too tempting to let it rip every chance you get. As you can see, I did find a great spot behind an unused facility of some kind, and I started ripping some crazy donuts and drifts. It was so fun. This car is an animal. Once you disable the stability and traction control, it just becomes such a drift beast, and that's why it's so dangerous to drive without this stability control safety net in place. But for stuff like this, when you're just fooling around in a controlled environment and you're being careful, obviously you can tell by the footage, I had a lot of fun doing it. One other thing I want to praise about this car is before I even bought the car, when I was researching it, I noticed a lot of the owners that would do similar types of shenanigans in their car. They would leave two stripes of rubber down. I was kind of surprised that this behaves this way. I thought for sure it would behave more like an open differential and just leave one wheel peels, single stripe of rubber everywhere. But this differential is awesome. Or motor, I don't know if there's even a differential in there. It behaves a lot like a limited slip or a locker, which allows you to do stuff like this, and just really makes me appreciate the car even more.
All right, back at headquarters. I think you would agree, based on the footage you just saw, this mod works pretty well. Checking out the aftermath here, there's some pretty gross, rubbery, muddy watery sludge on the inner wheel well. I also didn't do these winter tires any favors. They're pretty feathered here, as you can see, but like I said, these are kind of junk anyway. The set's junk. I'll sell them for the wheels, but the tires themselves have kind of had it anyway. So I'm going to put the new used ones on. Here's the used ones that I picked up over the weekend, and plug the sensor back in so the car is back to normal. Here's the switch I bought intending to use for this stability control kill switch purpose. I bought it online on Amazon. It seems like it would work just fine for most applications. However, I decided I'm not going to use a switch for a couple of reasons. One, it's pretty hard to get to the switch even if it's under the car, unless you take the wheel off after it's been jacked up. So problem number one is it's hard to get to, and the main purpose of this switch was to make it so I could get to the switch and disable stability control easily without having to jack up the car, and I'm not sure that'd be even possible. Other reason is I'm kind of hesitant to start cutting into my car's wiring. The sensors and wiring for the sensors are all easily replaced. I could just order a new one from Tesla if I screwed it up, or if I was going to sell the car and not use the switch anymore. But I don't know, I'm still hesitant to cut into it. And then lastly, I'd be worried I'd forget about this switch and sell the car in a year or two, and this switch gets triggered accidentally, and someone crashes the car. So I'm going to do without the switch for now, but this is a pretty good switch for this purpose. It's a marine switch for boats, and it's supposed to be waterproof and stuff like that. I'll put the link in the description below, but just so you know, I'm not going to bother with the switch after all. I'm just going to disconnect the lines, the sensor, when I want to do silly things in the car. All right, putting the plug back on is a little tricky, I admit. The best way to put it back on to me is to take off your gloves so you have more room, even though I didn't, and put one finger on the left-hand side behind the mounted connector. Put the other hand and finger on the other side like this. Try to find it back there and coax it into position, and then gently pull it forward. Or if you have more dexterity than me, you could probably reattach it by putting your hand back here and pushing it towards the camera from the back. I did it like this because I kind of got lucky with the way the plug was placed, so that worked out well for me. But just so you know, it's not super easy to get back attached, but it's doable and it doesn't take that long, at least if you've done it a couple times.
Once you get the sensor connected again, your wheel back on, and everything ready to drive again, you're going to want to do what they call the 2-button salute on the steering wheel. This is the way to do the reset of the software, and that will trigger the computer in the car to check all the systems and recognize that the sensor you had unplugged is now plugged in again, and then you'll get rid of your error codes, assuming you've plugged it in correctly. Don't be like me. Please rotate your tires, especially on the rear drive cars. They will destroy those rear tires if you don't rotate them. And I bought these used, but I still could have rotated them sooner than I did. So shame on me for ending up with these bald tires.
I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please subscribe to Mind of Matter for more car-related, truck-related, and maybe even boat-related videos coming up soon.